Arguing the point, not the person. The latest from podnews.net with Libsyn. Stop dreaming, start podcasting. Seeker and Oxford Road have launched what they call the first ever civility score for podcasts. Using AI, the tool scans podcast episodes in their entirety, enabling it to spot instances of ad hominem attacks that occur at any point in a program, so brands can avoid getting caught in the crossfire. CEO of Oxford Road, Dan Granger, says now we can reward the most responsible voices rather than those that are simply the loudest. Media research firm Coleman Insights has launched Pod Predictor, a way to test podcast concepts and marketing before release. The tool surveys 1,000 podcast listeners about your idea. Podcast One has signed an exclusive distribution and monetization agreement with Some More News and its spin-off. It's part of the company's proposed acquisition of certain assets of Cast Media. Video podcast production company The Fellas Studios has attracted a £1.5 million investment. The investment for the company, which is about $2 million, came from creators. Acast has launched its self-service ad platform in France. Entries for the Independent Podcast Awards close tomorrow. Podcast ad creative has never been more important, says Paul Rismandel from Signal Hill Insights, quoting a survey the company worked on. My hypothesis, he says, is that great podcast ads work because they keep a listener's attention, rather than radio or streaming, where part of an ad's job is to attract a listener's attention. Thank you to Joanne Phillips for becoming our latest personal supporter. Your support is super kind and it ensures that we're less reliant on commercial interests for funding our journalism. So thank you, Joanne. Very, very grateful for that. podnews.net/support if you would like to join her. And in tomorrow's Pod News Weekly Review, a full interview with the first ever podcaster, Christopher Lydon. And guest hosting for Sam Sethi this week is Rob Greenlee, who takes us through his personal thoughts on 20 years of podcasting and the future.
We will likely be the medium that is increasingly trusted. Exposing the truth and building trust with audiences it is a role that, I'll be honest, the older mainstream media has kind of been walking away from.
And in podcast news, Black Magic Woman becomes the first Indigenous podcast to join ARN's iHeart Podcast Network Australia. The show's provided a platform for Aboriginal doctors, lawyers, parents, entrepreneurs, professors, authors and actors, recognising the importance of telling their own stories separate from the mainstream media. And Machine Takeover is a new podcast that blends artificial intelligence voices, narrative comedy and immersive sound design, as well as human acting. It's the first time this mix of elements has been combined for a podcast, they say. Set in the future, it tells the story of John Doe, the last human on Earth, forced into the AI apocalypse to teach two AI systems, Arissa and Pantheon, what it means to be human. Now listen, if you only get this podcast, you're missing out on more stuff in our email newsletter every day, including regular tips and tricks and ads for podcasts we've seen in the wild, and plenty more things, and of course all of the links to everything that we talk about. You can subscribe at podnews.net, sort it into a folder if you like, that's fine, but if you think the podcast is good, well, the newsletter is better. This podcast is sponsored by Libsyn. Are you ready to tell your story? Libsyn has an all-in-one, fast, easy podcast tool that allows you to plan, record and create your podcast today. So stop dreaming. Start podcasting with Libsyn, libsyn.com. And that's the latest from our newsletter. To read all the stories and subscribe, we're at podnews.net.